Ma'am, let's be completely real. Look at your skin. You're an older black woman sitting in a platinum-level lobby with a cheap old bag. There is a small credit union 3 blocks down. People like you belong there, not in my house.
Sterling Ashford sneered, gesturing toward the brass doors, waving his hand as if he were brushing away filth. He leaned in closer, his voice dripping with absolute disgust, and he spat.
Don't embarrass yourself any further. We manage billions, not welfare checks. Get out before I have security physically drag you out to the curb.
The woman didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still for 3 hours, completely ignored, without a single glass of water offered to her. Nobody in that marble room had any idea that this quiet black woman was actually Vivian Calloway, the $40 billion tycoon. Their firm had been begging on its knees to sign a $2 billion deal for 8 months. They treated her like garbage because they were certain she was nobody. But when she finally walked upstairs, she didn't just take her money. She tore their precious contract in half, and she obliterated a 90-year family dynasty. In 40 seconds, have you ever watched an arrogant white billionaire set fire to his own family legacy because of pure racial arrogance? Pull up a chair. Let me tell you exactly how she destroyed them. Welcome to Black Stories, the home of absolute dignity and ultimate power reversals. If you want to see corrupt gatekeepers get exactly what they deserve, hit that subscribe button right now. Now, let's go back to 5 o'clock that morning, where the downfall of a dynasty quietly began. 5 o'clock in the morning. Charlotte, North Carolina. The sky was still the color of wet slate, and most of the city was asleep. But in a quiet house at the edge of Myers Park, the kitchen light was already on. Vivian Calloway stood at the counter in a gray robe, pouring coffee into a plain white mug. No staff hovering around her. No assistant. No security detail clogging up the hallway. Just a woman, 58 years old, alone in her kitchen the way she liked it, listening to the coffee maker tick and the refrigerator hum and the first birds starting up outside the window. You would not have looked at her twice. That was the thing about Vivian. She had spent her whole life being the most powerful person in every room she walked into. And she had spent that same whole life making sure you would never guess it from looking. Her robe was old. Her slippers were older. Her hair was pinned back the way her mother used to pin it. And the only jewelry she ever wore was a thin gold wedding band, worn smooth, from a husband who had been gone 9 years now. She carried her coffee to the small table by the window and sat down. And then she did what she did every single morning before the world woke up and started asking things of her. She reached into the pocket of her robe and took out a piece of brass. It was a token, about the size of a silver dollar, worn down on the edges, so the lettering had almost rubbed away. If you held it to the light and turned it just right, you could still make out the words, Birmingham, Rolling Works, and underneath, a number, and four. 7. 1. That was her father's number. That was the number on the brass check he would hand the foreman every morning when he clocked into the foundry, and the number he would get back every evening when he clocked out. For 29 years. Standing in front of a furnace, hot enough to melt the boots off, a careless man. His name was Elias Calloway. He had been dead 20 years. And Vivian Calloway, a woman who could move billions of dollars with a single phone call, sat at her kitchen table every morning and held her dead father's foundry token in her palm until the metal went warm. Because there was a thing he used to say, and she never wanted to forget the sound of it. Babe. They can tell you no. They cannot make you small. Those are two different things. And don't you ever let anybody teach you they're the same. She turned the token over once, twice. Then she set it down on the table, next to a single sheet of paper. The paper was old too, yellowed, folded so many times the creases had gone soft as cloth. Across the top, in the kind of serif type they used back then, it said, Ashford and Brandt, Commercial Lending, Birmingham Office. And below that, dated March of 1971. 3 short paragraphs. Very polite, very professional, very clear. Informing a Mr. E. Calloway that after careful review, the firm had determined that his loan request in the amount of $4,000 for the purchase of a lathe and a milling machine to start a small repair shop did not at this time meet the firm's criteria. It did not say why. It never said why. They never wrote the reason down. Smart men never write the reason down. Vivian had read that letter so many times she could recite it in her sleep. Her father had kept it in a cigar box his whole life. Not out of bitterness, he always said, but as a record. People will tell you it didn't happen the way you remember. He told her once. So you keep the paper remembers for you $4,000? They told a hard-working man with a steady job and a clean name that he was not worth the risk of $4,000. So he saved it. Dollar by dollar, year by year, foundry shift by foundry shift, until he could buy that lathe with his own cash and owe no man anything. He built his little repair shop. He sent his daughter to Hampton University on a scholarship and a prayer, and the rest of it in cash he earned with his own 2 hands. And that daughter went on to Wharton, and then to Wall Street. And then she came home to the South and built something of her own. Today, Ashford and Brandt, now called Ashford Brandt Wealth Partners, managed about $60 billion and considered itself one of the great old houses of American finance. And today, Vivian Calloway managed about $40 billion of her own, ran a family office on top of that, and steered a foundation that her father's name was carved into the front of. And today, at 10 in the morning, by a strange and beautiful turn of the wheel, she had a meeting at Ashford Brandt Wealth Partners. They had been chasing her for 8 months. Their managing partner, Sterling Ashford, the founder's great-grandson, had personally written her 3 letters. They wanted the Calloway family office to move a $2 billion alternatives mandate onto their platform. $2 billion to a firm like theirs in the year they were having. That was not just a fee. It was oxygen. It was the difference between a good decade and a bad one. Her people had handled the early conversations, the pitch books, the due diligence. Everyone at Ashford Brandt assumed that today the Calloway delegation would arrive. Some advisors, some lawyers, a junior principal maybe, to finalize terms. That is what was on their calendar. Calloway Family Office. Final review. Conference Room A. What was not on their calendar was Vivian herself. She finished her coffee. She washed the mug by hand and set it in the rack. And then she went upstairs and dressed. And she dressed deliberately, the way a general chooses ground, a charcoal suit, beautifully cut, but quiet. No logos, no flash. A cream silk blouse, low heels, the thin gold band. She put the brass token in her left jacket pocket. She put the 1971 letter, folded once, into a slim leather portfolio, along with a single other document, and she zipped the portfolio shut. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. Not vanity. Something more like an old soldier checking his rifle before he walks out the door. I am not going to win them, she thought. I am going to go see who they are first. Because money is loud, and people only show you the truth when they think you're nobody. She had learned that the hard way, over and over, across 30 years. The truth is what people do to you when they are certain you cannot do anything back. So she would walk into Ashford Brant as nobody, and she would let them tell her, in their own words, exactly who they were. She picked up her keys, her own keys, to her own car, and she drove herself downtown. Ashford Brant Wealth Partners occupied the top 14 floors of a glass tower on South Tryon Street, and the lobby of their offices was built to make a certain kind of person feel a certain kind of way. The floors were a pale marble, veined in gold. The ceilings ran 20 feet high. On the walls, in heavy gilt frames, hung oil portraits of dead men. The founders? 4 generations of Ashfords and Brants. All of them white. All of them grave. All of them looking down on you with the patient confidence of men who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. The air smelled like lilies and lemon oil and old money. There was a curved reception desk of black walnut, and behind it sat a young woman named Brooke, 24, blonde, in a navy dress, with the careful smile of someone who had been hired in part for the smile. Vivian came through the brass doors at 9:42 in the morning, 18 minutes early. She crossed the marble floor, and her heels made a soft, unhurried sound. And she stopped at the desk and said, pleasant and plain, "Good morning. I have a 10 o'clock." Brooke looked up, and here is where it began. Not with a scream, not with a slur, but with the small flick of the eyes that black people in this country learn to read before they learn to read words. Brooke looked at Vivian's face. She looked at the suit, which was good, but which her training apparently had not taught her to recognize as good. She looked at the lack of an entourage. She made a decision in about a second and a half. And the decision was, this one is not important. Sure, Brooke said, brightly. The brightness already. A half step too bright. And what company are you with? I'm here to see Mr. Flash. Ashford's group, Vivian said. The 10 o'clock is on the calendar. Conference room A. I believe. Brooke's smile tightened at the corners. Conference room A is a private client meeting this morning, she said. Are you? Sorry. Are you maybe here for the community banking desk that's on the 4th floor? We do have a community-focused product, and they're really lovely down there. No, Vivian said gently. I'm in the right place. The 10 o'clock. Brooke typed something, frowned at her screen, typed again. There was, of course, no line on the calendar with Vivian's name on it, because the firm had no idea the principal herself was the appointment. They were expecting the Calloway delegation. Brooke saw a fully booked conference room, a major private meeting, and a woman in front of her who, in Brooke's narrow little reckoning, did not fit the shape of a person who belonged in that meeting. I'm not seeing your name here, Brooke said. The brightness was thinning out now. Do you have an appointment confirmation? An email? Maybe. My office arranged it directly with Mr. Ashford. Vivian said. Right. Brooke said, in the tone people use when they have already stopped believing you. Okay, why don't you have a seat right over there? And I'll see if anybody's available. Just over there. She gestured to a cluster of chairs by the window, away from the desk, out of the flow, and Vivian Calloway, who could have ended it right there with 4 words and a phone call. Simply said, of course. Thank you. She walked to the chairs. She sat down. She set her leather portfolio across her knees, folded her hands on top of it, and she waited. Now I want you to hold something in your mind while we sit in that lobby. I want you to remember that the woman in that chair was not weak. She was not confused. She was not, as Brooke had already decided, a lost soul who had wandered into the wrong building. She was the single largest opportunity this firm had seen in a decade. Sitting 15 feet from a girl who had just sent her to the corner like a child. Vivian knew exactly who she was. The question she had come downtown to answer was whether they knew who they were. And so she did the hardest thing there is to do. She sat still. And she watched. She watched for 3 hours. In the first hour, she learned how the firm treated people it valued. At 10:05, the brass doors opened and a man came in. 60s. White. Golf tan. A blazer with brass buttons. And Brooke came up out of her chair like she had been launched. Mr. Pruy? Oh my goodness. It's so good to see you. How was Kiowa? Brutal. The man laughed. Wind off the water all weekend. Couldn't buy a putt. Well, let me get you settled. Can I bring you a coffee? An espresso. We just got the new machine. Marcus is expecting you. He's so excited. Go right on up. You know the way. And she was already walking him toward the elevators. Already pressing the button for him. Already laughing at something he said. And she did not once, not for half a second, ask Mr. Pruitt for an appointment confirmation, or an email, or proof that he had any business being there at all. Vivian watched. She filed it away. At 10:40, a young couple came in, late 30s. Expensive, casual. The wife in a tennis skirt. And they got the same treatment. Sparkling water in real glasses. A glossy folder pressed into their hands. A relationship manager who came down personally to escort them up. Shaking hands. So glad you came in. Let's find you a great seat. At 11:15, a man in a suit, nicer than the portraits, walked straight past the desk with a nod. And Brooke just waved. Vivian sat in her corner. Nobody offered her water. Nobody offered her coffee. Nobody asked if she was comfortable, or whether she had been helped, or whether she needed anything at all. Twice, a passing associate looked at her, the way you look at a piece of furniture that has been left in an odd place. A flicker of, what is that doing there? And then they walked on. You know this lobby, even if you have never set foot in a wealth management firm in your life. You know this lobby. You have stood in some version of it. You have been the one in the corner chair. You have watched the room rearrange itself around people who look a certain way and freeze around people who look like you. You know exactly the temperature of that water. Nobody brought her. In the second hour, she learned what the firm thought of her, specifically. Around 11:40, a relationship manager finally came down to deal with her. His name was Chad Pemberton. Early 40s. Gym shoulders, straining the jacket. A haircut that cost more than most people's car payment. He had clearly been sent down by somebody who wanted the situation handled and did not want to handle it himself. He did not sit. He stood over her, hands in his pockets, and he spoke slowly and a little too loud. The way people do to someone they have decided either does not speak English well or does not understand money. Hi there, Chad. I understand you have been waiting a while. Sorry about that. We're slammed today. He did not sound sorry. So, I'm told you don't have a confirmed appointment. Is that right? My office arranged the meeting directly. Vivian said, Sure. Sure. He nodded the way you nod at a child describing a dream. Here's the thing. We're a private wealth firm, so we work on a referral basis. Mostly. And we do have minimums. Significant minimums. For the kind of full-service relationship you might be looking for. He pulled a brochure out of his jacket. Glossy. A smiling family on a sailboat. Now, what I would recommend, especially if you're just getting started, is our Foundations product. Lower entry point. It's a great on-ramp. A lot of folks in your situation really like it. Folks in my situation? Vivian repeated, quietly, not a question. Just turning the phrase over. Examining it like a coin. First-time investors, Chad said smoothly. The way a man steps around a puddle. People building towards something. And honestly, you might want to bring a financial advisor with you next time. Somebody who can kind of walk you through the basics. So you don't feel overwhelmed. No shame in it. We all start somewhere. He held out the brochure. Vivian looked at it. She did not take it. She looked back up at Chad Pemberton. And there was something in her face now. Not anger. Nothing as small as anger. Something more like a scientist who has just gotten a very clean result. That's kind of you, she said. I'll keep waiting for Mr. Plick. Ashford. Chad's jaw set. He was not used to the brochure being refused. He set it down on the little table beside her chair, where it would sit, untouched. For the next hour, I'll let him know you're here, he said, in a tone that meant he would do no such thing. And he walked off. Vivian sat with her hands folded and watched him go. And somewhere in her chest, very quiet, she heard her father's voice. They can tell you no. They cannot make you small. She was not small. She had never in her life been smaller than the room she was in. But she sat very still, and she let them keep telling her no. Because every no was evidence. And Vivian Calloway had learned a long time ago that the most expensive thing in the world is a man who is certain. In the third hour, she met the man himself. It was nearly 1 o'clock when Sterling Ashford came down to the lobby. He did not come down for her. He came down because a major client was leaving. And he liked to walk his major clients to the door. Personally, it was an old money touch. The lord of the manor seeing the guest out, and he was mid-handshake by the brass doors, laughing about Kiowa, when his eyes snagged on the woman in the corner chair who was, somehow, still there. He had heard about her. Brooke had mentioned it. Chad had mentioned it. With a roll of the eyes. Some woman, no appointment, says she's here for your group. Won't take a hint. Sterling had assumed it was handled The fact that it was not, the fact that this person was still sitting in his marble lobby, under the portrait of his great-grandfather, 3 hours into a workday, irritated him in a deep, almost physical way. It was a small wrongness in a world he expected to be ordered to his liking. He said goodbye to his client, and then he walked over to the corner chair, and he stood in front of Vivian Calloway, and he looked down at her with the particular expression of a man inspecting something that has been tracked into his house on the bottom of someone's shoe. Let me tell you what Sterling Ashford saw. He saw a black woman in late middle age, in a dark suit. He saw no entourage, no jewelry he recognized, no markers of the world he understood. He had built an entire life inside a system designed to make sure people like the woman in that chair stayed in the lobby. And that system had told him, his whole life, in 1,000 quiet ways, that a person who looked like her and arrived like her could not possibly be a person who mattered to a person like him. So he did not see $40 billion. He did not see Wharton. He did not see the most important meeting his firm would have all year. He saw a problem. He saw an intruder, and he decided to remove her. And here is where his voice went, exactly where you heard it at the start of this story. "Mom," he said, "I'm Sterling Ashford. I'm the managing partner here." He said the title, the way other men flash a badge. "I understand you have been told a few times now that there's been a mix-up. Let's be completely real for a second. Look at your skin. You're an older black woman in a platinum-level lobby with a cheap Old Bay and no appointment. There's a small credit union about 3 blocks down on Trade Street. People's Federal. People like you belong there. Not in my house. A few feet away, behind the walnut desk." Brooke pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. Sterling leaned in closer, and his voice dropped, and it dripped with disgust. "Don't embarrass yourself any further. We manage billions in this building, not welfare checks. So, I'm going to ask you nicely, one time. Get up and get out, before I have security drag you out to the curb." And Vivian Calloway looked up at Sterling Ashford. Calm, level, almost gentle. And she said, "Thank you. I'll wait. Hold on. Stop. Let me get this straight. Because I need a second. This man, the managing partner of a $60 billion firm, just stood in his own lobby and told a woman to leave because of the color of her skin and the age of her bag. And that woman, the one he just threatened to have dragged to the curb, is the exact person his firm has been on its knees chasing for 8 months. $2 billion. Her name is on a contract upstairs. In his own building. On the floor. He won't let her ride the elevator, too. And he doesn't know. He has no idea. He is looking right at his entire year. And he sees garbage to be thrown out. I have watched a lot of people make a lot of mistakes. I have never in my life watched a man hand someone a bigger knife and then turn around and show her his back. Let's keep going, because Sterling Ashford was about to make it so much worse. He straightened up. He had expected her to leave when he told her to. People left when he told them to. That was practically the definition of who he was. The fact that she had said, "I'll wait," landed on him as something close to insolence. "There is nothing to wait for," he said. And whatever thin politeness he had left peeled off like cheap paint. "I just told you, there's no meeting. Now, I would appreciate it if you would respect that this is a place of business and not a homeless shelter. I understand, Vivian said, and I'll wait for the 10 o'clock. Sterling's face went a shade of red that did not suit him. He turned to the security guard by the doors. An older man, gray at the temples, a good face, who had been watching this whole thing with a stillness of his own. Walter, Sterling said, help this woman find her way out. She's confused about where she is. Walter, the guard did not move right away. He looked at Vivian. There was something in the way she sat. That backbone, that quiet, that complete and total absence of fear in a person who had every reason to be afraid in that room. It gave him pause. Walter had stood in that lobby for 11 years. He had watched 1,000 important people come and go, and some old instinct in him, an instinct that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with knowing how a powerful person actually carries themselves, was sending up a flare. Sir, Walter said slowly. She says she's got a meeting. Maybe we just call up and check first. I am the managing partner. Walter. Sterling snapped. I think I know who has a meeting in my building. Please escort her out. And here is the moment. Here is where it all turned. Because the brass doors opened one more time, a man came through them quickly. A young man, early 30s, a leather folio under his arm, slightly out of breath, scanning the lobby. He was sharply dressed and clearly important within the firm's own ecosystem. You could tell by the way the associates near the elevators straightened up when they saw him. His name was Daniel Reyes, and he was the lead of the firm's institutional team. The man whose entire last 8 months of professional life had been spent building the pitch for the Calloway mandate. He was the one who had written the letters Sterling signed. He was the one who actually understood, down to the decimal, what was at stake, and he had spent the last hour upstairs in conference room A with a dozen of the firm's most senior people waiting for the Calloway principal, who had not arrived, growing more and more frantic, until someone in his group finally got a text back from the Calloway office that said only, "She is already there. She is already there." Daniel had read that text 3 times, trying to make it make sense. There, where? There's no one. And then a cold horror had opened in his stomach, and he had stood up so fast, he knocked his chair over, and he had run for the elevator. Now he stood in the lobby, breathing hard, and his eyes found the woman in the corner chair. The woman, his managing partner, was at this very moment, having physically removed from the building by a security guard, and Daniel Reyes felt the blood leave his entire body. He knew her face. Of course he knew her face. He had spent 8 months studying everything about her. Her photo was on the cover of the pitch book. Her photo was in the annual reports of 3 different funds. Her photo had been on the wall of his own war room for half a year. Mr. Ashford, Daniel said. His voice came out strangled. Mr. Ashford. Stop. Sterling turned, annoyed at the interruption. What? Daniel crossed the lobby in about 4 steps. He looked like a man walking toward a car crash. He could already hear, but could not stop. He stopped in front of the corner chair. And then, in front of Brooke. In front of Chad. In front of Walter. In front of his managing partner. In front of every associate frozen by the elevators. Daniel Reyes did something nobody in that lobby had ever seen anyone do for the woman in the corner. He extended his hand, and he said, with everything in him, Mrs. Calloway, I am so sorry. I'm Daniel Reyes. I lead the institutional group. We've corresponded. I am so sorry you have been kept waiting. Please, please come up. Everyone is upstairs. The lobby went very, very quiet. Brooke's smile died on her face. Chad Pemberton, who had wandered back over to watch the woman finally get thrown out, went still as a post. And Sterling Ashford, managing partner, fourth generation, heir, lord of the manor, said, in a voice that had suddenly lost all of its weight, "I'm sorry, Calloway. This is..." "What?" Vivian Calloway stood up. She stood up slowly, without hurry, the way she did everything. She smoothed her jacket once. She looked at Daniel Reyes, and her face softened, just slightly, because she could see he was genuinely horrified, and she had spent her whole life being able to tell the difference between the people who had hurt you and the people who simply had not been the one to stop it in time. "Mr. Reyes," she said, "thank you. I have been looking forward to meeting you in person." Then she turned, and she looked at Sterling Ashford. And I want you to understand what that look was, because it was not rage. Vivian Calloway did not do rage. Rage is what you feel when you are not sure you will be heard. Rage is the sound a person makes when they are afraid the truth will not land on its own. Vivian had no such fear. She looked at Sterling Ashford the way her father used to look at a furnace, with a deep passion, professional understanding of exactly how much heat the thing in front of her could put out, and exactly how little it could do to touch her. "Mr. Ashford," she said, "I believe you offered to have me dragged to the curb." Sterling's mouth opened. Nothing came out. His golf tan had gone the gray of the marble under his feet. "I'm Vivian Calloway," she said. "I'm the principal of the Calloway family office. The 10 o'clock is mine. It has been mine since 9:42 this morning. A pause. Shall we go up? I believe your people are waiting." The elevator ride to the top floor took 40 seconds, and it was the longest 40 seconds of Sterling Ashford's life. He stood in the corner of the mirrored car, and he could see himself reflected on every side. Pale, sweating at the hairline. A man who had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Daniel Reyes stood beside Vivian, talking too fast, trying to fill the silence with apologies and logistics, and the names of the people waiting upstairs. And Vivian let him, nodding kindly, because she understood that some people talk when they are terrified the way some people pray. Sterling said nothing. He was running a tape in his head, over and over, the way you do after the worst moment of your life. Look at your skin. The credit union. People like you. Welfare checks. Drag her out to the curb. He was hearing his own voice say those words. And he was watching them land on the most important client his firm had ever courted. And there was no version of the math, no matter how he ran it, that did not end with him standing in the rubble of his own career. He had not been racist. He was already telling himself, in the desperate private way that men like him always tell themselves, he had just made a mistake, an honest mistake. Anyone could have. There was no entourage. She did not have an appointment under. He had not known, but that, of course, was the whole point. That was the entire indictment. He had not known, so he had shown her the truth. He had treated her exactly the way the system had trained him to treat a black woman with no obvious power, which is to say, he had treated her like nothing. like a problem, like garbage to be steered 3 blocks down and out of his sight. The not knowing was not his defense. The not knowing was his confession. Because what you do to a person when you think they are nobody is who you are. Everything else is just a performance for the people you have already decided can hurt you back. The elevator opened onto the 40th floor. Conference room. Ran along the south wall of the building, and it was a cathedral of glass and money. A single slab of book matched walnut for a table, 30 feet long, ringed by leather chairs, with a wall of windows looking out over the whole city of Charlotte, spread small and bright below. Around that table sat 12 of the most senior people at Ashford Brandt Wealth Partners. The chief investment officer, the head of alternatives, 2 senior portfolio managers, the general counsel, the chief operating officer, all of them in their best suits, all of them assembled for what they understood to be the most important meeting of the year, all of them on their phones or murmuring to each other, growing nervous, wondering aloud where the Calloway delegation was. The doors opened, and Daniel Reyes walked in, and behind him walked a black woman in a charcoal suit, and behind her walked Sterling Ashford, gray-faced and silent. A few of the senior people glanced up, registered a woman they did not recognize, and started to look back down. The same reflex Brooke had had 3 hours earlier. The reflex of a room that has been built over 90 years. To assume that the person who walks in looking like Vivian Calloway is staff, is support, is anything but the principal. And then Daniel Reyes said, in a clear, ringing voice, "Everyone, I would like to introduce Mrs. Vivian Calloway, founder and chief executive of Calloway Sovereign Partners, principal of the Calloway Family Office. A beat, hour 10 o'clock. You ever watch 12? People realize the same thing at the same time. It moves through a room like a current. Phones went face down. Chairs straightened. A senior portfolio manager named Green actually stood halfway up, then sat, then stood again. Not knowing what his own body should do, the chief investment officer, a sharp woman named Patricia Vance, went very still. Because Patricia had been in this business 25 years, and she could already feel the shape of what had happened. She could feel the catastrophe sitting in the room with them. Even before she knew the details, Vivian walked to the head of the table, not to a seat along the side, where a guest would sit, to the head. She set her slim leather portfolio down on the walnut in front of her. She unbuttoned her jacket, and she sat, and she folded her hands, and she looked down the length of that 30-foot table at 12 of the most powerful people in Southern finance. And she let the silence build until it had real weight. "Good afternoon," she said. "Thank you all for waiting. I know it has been a long morning." The faintest pause. "I have been downstairs since 9:42. Patricia Vance closed her eyes for just a second. "Let me tell you how I spend the first part of every relationship." Vivian said, "Before I move a single dollar of capital to any firm, and we are discussing a great many dollars today, I like to see how that firm behaves when it does not know who I am. Because a pitch book will tell me what you want me to believe about you. But how you treat a stranger you have decided is unimportant. That tells me who you actually are. And I have learned, over a long career, that the second thing is the only thing that has ever mattered. Nobody moved." Down the table, the general counsel had begun. very slowly, to take notes, the way you might if you sense that this conversation was going to be relevant in a courtroom someday. So this morning, Vivian continued, I came in early. I did not announce myself. I sat in your lobby in a corner chair, and I watched your firm work for 3 hours. She let that land. 3 hours. I would like to share what I saw, not to embarrass anyone, to be precise. I find people argue less when you are precise, and then calm as a surgeon. She laid it out. At 9:42, she said, I told your receptionist I had at 10 o'clock. She asked what company I was with. And when I told her I was here for Mr. Ashford's group, she suggested I might be looking for the community banking desk on the 4th floor. She did not check the calendar against my name, because my arrival did not fit the kind of person she expected this meeting to produce. She asked me to sit in the corner, away from the desk. She did not offer me water. Over the next 3 hours, she did not offer me water once. The receptionist was not in the room, but every person at the table understood that the story being told was not really about a glass of water. At 10:05, Vivian went on. A gentleman named Mr. Cruz. Pruitt arrived. Your receptionist greeted him by name, asked about his golf weekend at Kiowa, offered him espresso, and walked him personally to the elevator. She did not ask him for an appointment confirmation. She did not ask him for an email. She did not ask him what company he was with. A pause. At 10:40, a young couple received the same welcome, sparkling water in real glasses, a folder, an escort upstairs. At 11:15, a man walked past the desk and was simply waved through. I watched your firm extend warmth and trust and the benefit of every doubt to person after person after person. She turned her head slightly. I watched none of it extended to me. Green, the portfolio manager, had gone the color of paper. At 11:40, a relationship manager named Chad came down. He stood over me. He did not sit, and he told me, slowly and a little loudly, that this was a private firm with significant minimums, that he did not think it was the right place for my needs, and that I might want to start with the foundations product, the on-ramp for first-time investors. He suggested I bring a financial advisor next time, someone to walk me through the basics so I would not feel overwhelmed. He said, and I am quoting him exactly, that folks in my situation really like that product. When I asked what situation he meant, he said, first-time investors, people building towards something. She let the room sit with the obscenity of it for a moment, that a relationship manager had offered the foundations product, the firm's smallest, simplest, entry-level product, to a woman who could have bought the building they were sitting in. And then, Vivian said, at nearly 1 o'clock, Mr. Ashford came down. Every head at the table turned, very slightly, toward the managing partner, standing frozen near the door. He had not sat down. He stood against the glass wall with his hands at his sides, and he looked like a man watching his own funeral from the back of the chapel. Mr. Ashford introduced himself as the managing partner. Vivian said, and her voice never rose, never sharpened, stayed level as a still lake, which somehow made every word land harder than a shout. He looked down at me, and he told me to look at my own skin. He told me that an older black woman with a cheap bag belonged at the credit union 3 blocks down, and not, in his words, in his house. He told me not to embarrass myself. He told me this firm manages billions, not welfare checks. And he told me to get out before he had security drag me to the curb. The words dropped into that conference room and detonated in total silence. When I declined to leave, Vivian continued, "Mr. Ashford instructed your security guard, a man named Walter, to remove me from the building." Walter hesitated. Walter, it turned out, had better instincts than his managing partner. But the instruction was given. I was, at the moment Mr. Reyes walked into the lobby. In the process of being physically removed from this firm's offices, a pause, for sitting quietly in a chair, with a confirmed appointment to finalize a relationship your firm has spent 8 months, and I would imagine a significant marketing budget, trying to win. Patricia Vance put a hand over her mouth. And now, finally, Vivian Calloway reached for the slim leather portfolio in front of her. She unzipped it, and the entire table watched her hands as if she were diffusing something. She took out a single document and laid it flat on the walnut, turned so they could read it. It was the term sheet. Their term sheet, the proposal Daniel Reyes' team had spent half a year building, with the firm's logo embossed at the top, and the number that had kept these 12 people up at night, the number that meant oxygen, printed in clean black type, $2 billion. This is the mandate we were going to finalize today. Vivian said, $2 billion from the Calloway family office, to be managed on your platform across your alternative strategies. I came here this morning prepared to sign it. My counsel reviewed it. My investment committee approved it. The only thing left was for me to come in person and look you in the eye, the way my father taught me to do, before you trust anyone with anything that matters. She looked down the table. She looked at each of them. I have now looked you in the eye, she said, and I have my answer. She reached into the portfolio one more time, and what she drew out next was not a financial document at all. It was a single sheet of paper, yellowed, folded so many times the creases had gone soft as cloth. She unfolded it slowly, and she smoothed it flat on the walnut beside the $2 billion term sheet. And she turned it so they could read it too. Before I tell you what I have decided, Vivian said quietly, I want to show you something else. Because this is not only about this morning. This is older than this morning. This letter, Vivian said, is dated March of 1971. It is from a firm called Ashford and Brandt, Commercial Lending, Birmingham office. Your firm, 2 names ago. But your firm. The general counsel set down his pen. It is addressed to a man named E. Calloway. My father, Elias Calloway. In the winter of 1971, my father walked into your Birmingham office in his good Sunday suit, with a steady job at the Birmingham Rolling Works, a clean credit record, and a plan. He wanted to borrow $4,000 to buy a lathe and a milling machine so he could open a small repair shop. $4,000. She tapped the letter once with one finger. This is the firm's reply. 3 paragraphs. Very polite. It says that after careful review, his request did not meet the firm's criteria at this time. She looked up. It does not say why. It never says why. The men who wrote letters like this were always careful never to write the why down. She let the silence stretch. My father was not surprised, she said. He had grown up in Alabama. He knew exactly what did not meet our criteria meant when it was said to a black man in a good suit in 1971. So he did the only thing the world had left him to do. He saved it himself. $4,000. Dollar by dollar. Off a foundry wage. Standing in front of a furnace for 29 years. He bought that lathe with his own cash. He opened his shop. He owed your firm nothing. Because your firm had decided he was not worth the risk of $4,000. Her voice did not rise. It got quieter. And somehow, that was worse. And he sent his daughter to college on what he earned with those hands. That daughter went to Hampton, then to Wharton. Then she spent 30 years building something. She placed her palm flat between the two documents. The 1971 refusal on one side, the modern term sheet on the other, and here we are, she said. 53 years later, the same firm that would not lend my father $4,000 has spent 8 months begging my office for $2 billion. And when the principal of that office walked into your lobby this morning, a black woman in a suit with no entourage, who did not fit your idea of money. Your managing partner tried to send her 3 blocks down the road to the credit union, the exact same instinct, the exact same machine, 53 years. And the only thing that changed is the number of zeros. Nobody in that room could breathe. My father kept this letter his whole life. Vivian said, not out of hate. He did not have it in him to hate. He kept it as a record. He used to say, people will tell you it did not happen the way you remember. So, you keep the paper. The paper remembers for you. I have carried it in my bag for 20 years. And I will be honest with you, when your firm started courting me 8 months ago, I recognized the name immediately. I knew exactly who you were, and I thought very carefully about whether to take this meeting at all. She folded the letter once, gently, along its soft old creases, and she put it back in her portfolio, close to her chest, where she kept it. I took it, she said, because part of me wanted to believe that 90 years was long enough, that 4 generations was enough time for an institution to become something better than the one that turned my father away. I came here this morning genuinely hoping you would prove me wrong about my own caution. I wanted you to earn it. She zipped the portfolio shut. You did not, she said. You spent 3 hours showing me, in detail, that the machine still runs exactly the way it ran in 1971. You just put nicer carpet over it. And then Vivian Calloway picked up the $2 billion term sheet. Their term sheet, their oxygen, their year. And she tore it cleanly in half, down the middle. And she set the 2 pieces back on the walnut table, side by side, where everyone could see them. The mandate is withdrawn, she said. All of it. Effective now. You would think a thing like that would make noise. It did not. It was the quietest catastrophe you ever heard. 12 people watched $2 billion walk out of their lives in 2 torn pieces of paper. And the only sound in that room was the air conditioning and somebody's slow, unsteady breathing. But Vivian Calloway was not finished. And what she said next is the part that turned a bad afternoon into the end of a dynasty. I want to be clear about what is actually leaving this building, she said, because I do not think you have fully understood the size of what just happened. and I would hate for you to find out slowly over the next few weeks. That is a worse way to learn it. She folded her hands. The 2 billion was the Calloway family office. That is my own capital. But you should know that I do not move alone. The Meridian Public Employees Retirement System has roughly $4 billion in commitments that follow my office's allocation decisions. They co-invest where I co-invest. Because that is the arrangement we built over 15 years. And their investment staff trusts my judgment about which managers are worth their pensioners' money. They were prepared to allocate alongside this mandate. They will not be doing so now. And I will be making a personal call to their chief investment officer this afternoon to explain why. Patricia Vance made a small sound, like the air had been pressed out of her. There is also a sovereign partner. Vivian continued. An offshore fund I will not name in this room that had soft-circled a co-investment contingent on my office, anchoring the relationship. That is gone too. And there's the matter of reputation, which I know is the thing your firm prizes. Above all else, the portraits, the 90 years, the name on the door. So let me tell you how reputation is going to work. Now, I am not going to give a single interview. I am not going to post anything. I am not going to say one word publicly about this firm. A pause. I do not have to. Because $2 billion and a $6 billion co-investment relationship, walking out of a firm in a single afternoon, is not a thing that stays quiet. Your competitors will hear about it by Friday. Your other clients will hear about it the week after. And every one of them is going to ask the same question. What happened? And the answer is going to travel through this industry on its own legs, with no help from me. Because the truth is the most efficient thing there is. She let it land. You did not lose a client today. Mr. Ashford, she said, looking at the gray man against the glass. You lit a fuse, and I am not even the one who lit it. You did that yourself. 3 hours ago, in your own lobby, when you decided a woman in a corner chair was not worth a glass of water. The general counsel had stopped pretending to take notes. He was just staring at the torn term sheet. And here is where Vivian Calloway did the thing that separates a real story from a revenge fantasy. Because if all she had come to do was burn the firm down, she could have stood up right then and walked out and let the ashes fall where they fell. A lesser person would have. Lord knows they would have earned it. But that is not what dignity does. Dignity does not just destroy. Dignity redirects. Dignity takes the fire and points it at something worth building. Now, Vivian said, I would like to tell you where the $2 billion is actually going. Because it is not going back in a drawer. Money is only worth what it does. She reached into the portfolio one last time, and she took out a single page. And this one was crisp and new, and printed that morning. She slid it down the table. This is a term sheet of my own, she said. I drafted it last night. I had planned to mention it after we signed, as a kind of grace note, a way of closing the circle quietly. Now, I am going to mention it instead of signing yours. And I want it on your record. Mr. Counsel, since you have been writing everything down, the general counsel picked up his pen again, almost involuntarily. The Calloway Foundation, Vivian said, is launching a capital access fund, $2 billion, anchored by the money that was going to sit on your platform. The fund will do one thing. It will make the loan that nobody made my father. Small, commercial credit. $5 100,000, 50,000, $200,000 to black and brown entrepreneurs across the South who walk into rooms like yours every single day, in their good suits, with steady incomes and clean records and real plans, and who get told, in 3 polite paragraphs, that they do not meet the criteria. We are going to be their criteria. We are going to fund the machine shop and the bakery and the trucking company and the clinic and the daycare. And we are going to name the fund after the man your firm turned away in 1971. A pause. It is called the Elias Calloway Fund. My father's name on a building, doing the exact thing your firm refused to do for him. With the exact money your firm spent 8 months trying to put on its own books, she let the whole circle of it close in the silence. That, she said softly, is what somebody like me does with $2 billion. Now, I need to stop here for 1 second, because I want to make sure you feel the weight of what just happened. And not just the money part. The money is the loud part. But the money is not the story. Listen, a man looked at a woman and saw nothing. Because a system spent 90 years training him to see nothing, and that woman did not scream at him. She did not sink to his level. She did not even raise her voice. She just stood up straight, the way her daddy taught her. And she let the truth do what the truth does. And then, and this is the part that gets me, she took the worst thing that was done to her, the thing that should have made her bitter, the thing that broke generations of people before her, and she turned it into the very door she had been denied. And she held that door open for 10,000 people coming up behind her. That is not revenge. Revenge is small. What Vivian Calloway did was bigger than revenge. It was repair. And there is no force on this earth that scares a broken system more than a person it tried to break. Standing in the wreckage of its arrogance, calmly building something better than anything that system ever made. All right, let's see what happened to all of them. Because the fuse she talked about, it burned exactly the way she said it would. Vivian Calloway stood up. She buttoned her jacket. She gathered her portfolio, with her father's letter pressed safe inside it. And she looked around that long walnut table one last time. I want to say one thing before I go, she said. And I want to say it to the people in this room who did not do this. Because I know not all of you did. And I do not believe in punishing the whole house for the master's sins. Mr. Reyes. She looked at Daniel, who was sitting with his head in his hands. You did good work. Your team did good work. The pitch was sound. The strategy was sound. And when it mattered, you were the only person in this firm who walked into that lobby and treated me like a human being. None of what happened today is on you. I would hire you tomorrow. In fact, the faintest hint of warmth crossed her face. After the dust settles, you should give my office a call. We are always looking for people who run toward the right thing, instead of away from it. Daniel Reyes looked up at her with something close to tears. And he nodded. And there is a man at your front doors. Vivian said, Walter, your security guard. He is the only person in this entire building who looked at me and thought, maybe I should check before I throw her out. That instinct, that decency, that pause before the easy cruelty, that is worth more than every degree at this table. I would find a way to keep Walter, if I were you. Though after today, I do not imagine there is going to be much of an if I were you left to worry about. Then she turned, and she walked the length of that 30-foot table, past 12, frozen executives toward the door where Sterling Ashford still stood against the glass. She stopped in front of him, and for a moment, just a moment, the two of them stood face to face. The woman he had tried to throw out, and the man who had tried to throw her, with the whole bright city of Charlotte spread out in the windows behind them. "Mr. Ashford," she said, quiet, almost kind. "I am not angry at you. I want you to understand that because I think you expect me to be, and I think a part of you would even prefer it. Anger you could argue with, but I am not angry. I am 58 years old, and I have met 1,000 of you, and I stopped being angry a long time ago. Anger is exhausting, and you are not worth my exhaustion." She studied his gray face. "Here is what I am instead," she said. "I am done with the version of this industry you represent. I am simply, finally done. And so are a lot of people who used to be afraid of rooms like this one. The world that built you is ending. Mr. Ashford. Not because anyone is tearing it down, because people like me stopped asking it for permission. We built our own rooms, and we got rich enough to make yours optional. A pause. You should have brought me a glass of water." And Vivian Calloway walked out of conference room A and rode the elevator down 40 floors and crossed the marble lobby under the portraits of all those grave dead men and pushed through the brass doors into the afternoon sun. On her way out, she stopped at Walter's post. She took something out of her jacket pocket. A small business card. Heavy stock. Just her name and a direct number. And she pressed it into his hand. "Thank you," she said. "You were kind when it cost you something. I will not forget it." And then she was gone into the bright, loud city, driving herself home in her own car, with the brass token warm in her pocket and her father's letter folded against her heart. Behind her, on the 40th floor, the firm of Ashford Brant Wealth Partners began, very quietly, to come apart. So, where are they now? Let me tell you, because the fuse burned, and it burned fast, by Friday. Just like Vivian said, the rumor was loose in the industry. $2 billion gone in an afternoon. A $6 billion co-investment relationship walking with it. Nobody knew the details yet, but everybody knew the shape, and in a business that runs entirely on the perception of competence and trust, the shape alone was enough. By the following Monday, Patricia Vance, the chief investment officer, the woman who had closed her eyes in that meeting because she had felt the catastrophe coming before anyone said a word, walked into the boardroom and laid out the truth for the firm's board of directors. The whole truth. The 3 hours. The corner chair. The water nobody brought. Look at your skin. Welfare checks. The credit union. The security guard. And the term sheet. Torn in half on the walnut. By the most important client the firm had courted in a decade. The board did not take it well, because here is the thing about firms like Ashford Brant. The name on the door is the entire product. They do not make anything. They do not build anything you can hold. What they sell, the only thing they sell, is the belief that they are trustworthy, careful, wise, that the grave dead men in the portraits would approve of how their money is being handled. And Sterling Ashford had taken that one fragile thing, that 90-year-old reputation, and he had set it on fire in front of 12 witnesses and a general counsel's worth of documentation. All because he could not imagine that a black woman in a corner chair might be worth more than the carpet she was sitting on. The Meridian pension pulled its mandate 2 weeks later. Not just the co-investment, but its existing relationship, $4 billion. Gone. With a letter from its chief investment officer that was so politely devastating that someone leaked it and it got passed around the industry for a month. 2 other institutional clients, hearing the rumors, initiated reviews, which is the polite term for "we are looking for the exit." The sovereign partner vanished without a word, which is how sovereign partners say goodbye. Within 90 days, Ashford Brant Wealth Partners had lost nearly $12 billion in assets and commitments. The firm that had managed $60 billion was suddenly fighting to hold $48. The fee income evaporated. They froze hiring. They cut bonuses. They cut 200 jobs. And the rank-and-file people who lost those jobs, the analysts and the assistants and the back-office staff who had never done anything to anybody, paid for the arrogance of a man in a corner office who had never once had to wonder whether a room would let him stay. And Sterling Ashford. The board removed him as managing partner in the spring. They tried to do it quietly, stepping back to focus on the family's philanthropic interests. The press release said. But everyone in the industry knew exactly what had happened, because the story had legs of its own, exactly like Vivian promised, and it walked into every office in the country without any help from her. He kept his shares, the 4th-generation inheritance. He lost everything else. The title, the seat at the head of the table, the portraits, which now hung over a smaller, poorer, frightened firm that he was no longer allowed to run. He never gave an interview either. What was there to say? I told the principal of a $40 billion fund to take her business to the credit union because she did not look rich to me. There is no spin on the planet that survives that sentence. He had written his own ending, out loud, in his own lobby. And now he had to live inside it. I heard. And this part I cannot verify. But I believe it. Because it is exactly how these things go. That a year later, at a charity dinner, Sterling Ashford found himself seated at a table with a young black entrepreneur, a woman who had just opened her 3rd location of a business. She had started with a $200,000 loan. And when she mentioned, proudly, the name of the fund that had finally said yes to her after 4 banks said no, the Vivian Calloway Fund, Sterling Ashford, they say, set down his fork and excused himself and did not come back to the table. The paper remembers for you. That is what her father said. And now the whole industry remembered too. And Vivian Calloway, she drove home that afternoon and she made herself dinner. And she did not call anyone. And she did not celebrate. Because that was never what it had been about. The next morning she got up at 5 and she poured her coffee. And she sat at the small table by the window. And she held her father's foundry token in her palm until the brass went warm. The Vivian Calloway Fund launched that summer. $2 billion. Exactly as she had torn it loose from Ashford Brant's books, anchored under her father's name. The mandate was simple, and it was relentless. Capital for the people. The system had trained itself not to see. In the first year, the fund made loans to 400 businesses across 7 southern states. A machine shop in Birmingham. The first loan, and she signed that one herself. In person. in the city where it all started, to a young man who reminded her of photographs of her father, a bakery in Memphis, a trucking company in Jackson, a medical clinic in a town in the Mississippi Delta that had not had a doctor in 11 years, a daycare, a bookstore, a barber shop that became 3 barbershops. Real things. Things you could stand inside of. Things that hired people and fed families and changed the shape of a street. By the 3rd year, the fund had deployed its full $2 billion, and Vivian had raised another 3 from co-investors who wanted in. And the Meridian pension? The same pension that had walked away from Ashford Brandt was one of the first to commit because, as their chief investment officer put it in a letter Vivian kept framed on her wall, "We would rather our pensioners' money build the door than guard it." She still gave no interviews about Ashford Brandt. Reporters asked. Podcast hosts asked. A documentary crew asked. She declined every time. The same way her father would have, because she had learned long ago that your work speaks louder than your mouth ever could. And the work was speaking just fine. But she did speak. Once. That fall. At Hampton University. Her alma mater. Her father's pride. They asked her to give the commencement address to a sea of young black graduates in caps and gowns. She stood at the podium in the autumn sun, and she did not mention Ashford Brandt, and she did not mention the lobby, and she did not mention the corner chair, or the water nobody brought. She talked about a foundry token. She held it up so they could see it catch the light. She told them about the number 4, a fool, 7, 1, and the furnace, and the 29 years. She told them about a letter dated 1971, and 3 polite paragraphs, and $4,000, and a man who saved it himself, rather than let anyone tell him he was small. And then she said this, and I want you to hear it, because it is the whole thing in a handful of words. Somebody in your life is going to look at you and decide you are nobody. They will do it fast. They will do it certain. They will do it with a smile. Sometimes, and they will think they are being kind. And here is what I need you to understand. The way my father needed me to understand it. They can tell you no. They cannot make you small. Those are 2 different things. And the world is going to spend your whole life trying to teach you. They are the same. Don't you believe it for one single day? Your worth was settled long before they opened their mouths. Their no is a fact about them. It was never a fact about you. So let them say it. Let them be wrong out loud. And then you go build the door they would not open. And you hold it for the ones coming up behind you. Because that, not their permission, not their approval, not their little rooms with the portraits, that is the only revenge that has ever mattered. And it is the only revenge worthy of the people who saved their $4,000, one shift at a time, so that you could stand where you are standing right now. The entire field stood up. Every graduate, every parent, every grandmother in her church hat who had come a long way to watch a child cross a stage that this country once swore that child would never reach. And in the 3rd row, in the seats reserved for the family of the speaker, a grandson of Elias Calloway, Vivian's own boy, grown now, sat with his hand over his heart, because he had grown up holding that same brass token, and he had grown up hearing that same sentence at that same small kitchen table, and he understood, the way you only understand it once in your life, that he was watching the circle close. Okay, Real talk for a second. Let me come out from behind the story. This one is fiction. Vivian Calloway is not a real woman. Ashford Brandt is not a real firm. I made the names up. I made the numbers up. But you were not sitting there the whole time thinking, this is fake. Were you? Be honest with yourself. You were sitting there thinking about somebody, maybe somebody you love, maybe yourself, maybe a time you walked into a room in your good clothes, with your work history, with your steady job and your clean record and your real plan, and you watched the room decide in a second and a half that you were not important. Maybe you have been the one in the corner chair. Maybe you are still waiting for a glass of water that is never coming, and the foundry token, the 1971 letter, the $4,000 somebody's grandfather had to save one shift at a time because a man in a nice office said he did not meet the criteria. I made up the names, but you and I both know I did not make up the thing. That part is as real as the chair you are sitting in. That machine ran for 90 years before this story, and it is still running in some buildings today. And the only thing that has changed in a lot of places is the carpet. So let me ask you something, and I really want your answer. Not a like, an answer. Down in the comments. If you had been in that lobby, not the conference room, the lobby, if you had been one of those associates by the elevator who saw a woman sitting in the corner for 3 hours with no water, would you have walked over? Would you have brought her the glass? Would you have been the one to pause before the easy cruelty, the way Walter did? Or would you have looked away, the way the whole room looked away, and told yourself it was not your business? Tell me the truth, because the world is full of sterling Ashfords, but it does not actually need many of them to do its damage. What it needs is a lobby full of people who look away, and the only thing that ever breaks the machine is the one person who does not drop your answer below. Tell me about a time you were in that chair, or a time you brought somebody the water, or a time you wish you had. I read them. I read all of them, and if this story put something heavy in your chest, if it made you think about somebody, if it made you feel something real, then do me one favor. Hit that like button, so more people who need to hear this end up finding it. Share it with somebody who is sitting in a corner chair right now, thinking the room is right about them. And subscribe, because we have more stories like this coming. And trust me, you do not want to miss what is next. One last thing before you go. Your worth is not decided by the person across the desk. It is not measured by whether a room recognizes you, or whether a man in a nice suit thinks you fit. It is not granted by gatekeepers, and it cannot be taken back by them either. No matter how certain they sound when they point you toward the door, your worth was settled a long time ago. Settled by every shift somebody worked in front of a furnace so you could be here. Settled by every dollar somebody saved when the world said they could not have the loan. Settled by every grandmother who crossed a stage in her mind that her own knees never got to walk. They can tell you no. They cannot make you small. Don't you ever let anybody teach you. Those are the same thing. Now, go build your door and hold it open. I will see you in the next one.